The Free People Show, episode 18.
The Free People Show is a show about the practice and politics of being free. Free from government, free from coercion, and free to be yourself. Host Phil Anderson is a libertarian, a Christian, and was the kind of kid who, according to his grandmother, just wouldn't shut up. Phil and his co-hosts will talk politics, but also life in general, challenging you, entertaining you, persistently rapping on the back door of orthodox two-party politics, sparing nobody and taking no prisoners, maybe even making you laugh. Tweet us at @FreePeopleShow with questions and suggestions, or comment on Facebook during or after the show. For information about being a guest, hosting a live broadcast, or sponsoring the show, email info@freepeopleshow.com. Thanks for listening. Now, here's your host, Phil Anderson.
Welcome to the Free People Show, episode 18. We're very pleased to be with you tonight. You can find us at freepeopleshow.com, as usual, as well as on our host platform, Spreaker, as well as on iTunes and many other outlets, which you can find on our website, freepeopleshow.com. We're being distributed to pretty much all of the podcasting sites that you can imagine, and except for iTunes. We're not on iTunes yet. They require that you to have a certain number of published episodes before they will put you on iTunes, so we're not quite on iTunes yet, but we will be soon. So thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks to everyone who's helped to get this show ready. Engineer Samuel Anderson, show webmaster Dustin Dryfurst, our business manager Ron DePau, co-host Miles Kristen, everyone who's contributed to the show. We very much appreciate all of your contributions, and hopefully we're worthy of that as we venture into episode 18. My co-host tonight is Miles Kristen, who, among other things, is an agitator, is an activist, is a person who loves the truth and who seeks the truth wherever he can find it. He is afraid of nobody, not afraid of saying anything. He's not afraid to confront any politician about the BS that they're serving up. He is a journalist. He is also the owner and curator of the Yellow Rose Gallery at 122 State Street, and he's with us tonight. Welcome, Miles.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Our special guest tonight, actually three guests rolled into one, my good friend Chris Kressner, who is not a name probably that you've heard of in libertarian circles, at least not yet. But he is a big support to me, somebody I talk to quite a bit. He's got quite a bit of background in some things that I'm very interested in, not only Orthodox Christianity, but libertarianism, and the first topic that we're going to cover tonight, which is why it seems that engineers in particular are attracted to libertarianism, because as many people know, we've got a lot of engineers in the local party and in the state party, and so we're going to try to figure out why that might be appealing, why libertarianism is appealing to that particular mindset, to somebody who ends up being an engineer. So welcome, Chris.
Well, thanks, Phil and Miles. I really appreciate your invitation extended to me to join you for the show tonight. My name is Chris Kressner. I've been living in the Madison area for about 16 years. And how long have I known you, Phil? Probably about 10, 11, 12?
At least that long. We started at St. Ignatius in 2006, and I think you guys were already there. So that would be 11 years. Yeah, it's been a long time.
It's been a while. I've been somewhat involved in libertarian thought, we'll say, at least with a small L, since about 2006 when I discovered Ron Paul and his efforts to bring truth to power in Washington during his various campaigns.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks who found libertarianism through Ron Paul.
Right.
Hopefully they've gone beyond Ron Paul, because by a lot of accounts, including mine, he's not the perfect libertarian by any means. But if that's what it takes to get here, then that's fine with me.
At the convention, when I was talking to people, and I asked them what got them into the Libertarian Party, it was either one of three groups. It was either they've been in it for decades, Ron Paul, or you.
Or me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of people said in interviews, is I got involved in the Libertarian Party through Phil's campaign last year.
Well, I'm not afraid to ask for people's help, that's for sure, which is a good sign for a candidate. But I see what you mean. When we at the convention this last weekend, which, as many of you know, the Libertarian Party Wisconsin convention was this last weekend at Tree Haven Retreat Center up in Tomahawk. And by the way, those who organized that event, Nate Gall and Bob Burke and Patrick Barrett and the rest of that committee, it was fantastic. I mean, just so well planned, so well put together, facilitated everything we needed to do. And thanks to our guest speakers as well, which we'll give the props to later.
And lots of cheeseburgers.
And lots of cheeseburgers. And a little bit of heated discussion around the fire, a little liquor-fueled heated discussion around the fire. But that is to be expected at a libertarian convention. But back on track we go. So Chris found libertarianism through Ron Paul. So how was he, specifically Ron Paul, what were the things that he said that really ignited your interest?
Well, at the time when I started listening to him, it was towards the end of the Bush administration, and we all know how well, or how poorly rather, the Iraq War went.
Yeah.
So
it was a terrible idea.
Yeah, it became pretty obvious about midway through that war that, oh my gosh, what have we done here? And Ron was pointing out a lot of the missteps that the U.S. has made in foreign policy. Specifically, he also emphasized economic issues vis-a-vis discussions around the Federal Reserve System and how manipulating interest rates distorts markets and results in malinvestment.
Well, let me ask you this. Is that one of the things, and not to try to pigeonhole or profile anybody that is an engineer, has an engineering degree, but the people that I know who are engineers, and we've got, half a dozen just in the local county party, and many more at state and national. I think it's that aspect that everyone seems to have in common who are engineers and who are libertarians, and that is the economic aspect of it. Because what I see is engineers have a very analytical sort of, mathematical mind. And when you start talking about the Fed, when an engineer learns about the massive inflation taxation that happens through the Fed, it doesn't really bounce off the outside of their skull like it is with a lot of people. For an engineer, it's like a serious problem because there's a massive leak of wealth going, from people into the Fed, and it probably something that really sticks in your mind as being inefficient and not designed well, or at least people aren't aware of its design flaws. Would you say that's accurate?
Oh, absolutely. You mentioned inefficiency. Anytime you distort a market, you're disallowing it to discover value vis-a-vis the pricing mechanism, because distorting markets results in prices that don't reflect the relative value of goods and services to each other.
Yeah, we learned from Austrian economics that
Right.
prices are more than just what somebody charges. They're information. It's signaling what's scarce and what isn't.
Right. So, for example, a beautiful illustration, whenever a hurricane hits Florida, the coast of Florida, for example, people complain about gas pump price gouging.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually beneficial, because if gas stations didn't jack up prices during a situation of high demand, there would be a shortage very quickly, because they would run out and there would be long lines. So by raising prices in a situation of relative scarcity, what ends up happening is only the people who truly need that good or service and are willing to pay for it will have that resource allocated to them.
Yeah, and that's actually something similar to what we're going to talk about in the next segment with you, which is Uber, which you drive for Uber. I've driven for Uber and will again, but they have the same issue with surge
Coming
pricing.
out of the closet, I drive for Uber.
You say it proudly. It's a
Yes.
wonderful thing. I really believe that to be true. But I also remember that same thing happening with drywall after Hurricane Katrina. There was a huge issue because drywall became so expensive up here because a lot of drywall was being shipped to rebuild New Orleans and Louisiana, Mississippi, etc. But that's basically signaling scarcity. Like, hey, there's so much going down there that you need to pay more for it here, so that boosts production, which in the end helps solve the problem of scarcity. It doesn't solve it just to lower the price, because there still needs to be some incentive, some revenue going back to the manufacturer that says, hey, make more of this. They don't just do that off the top of their head. There's not people opening businesses out there just because they think there needs to be more of something. People open businesses to create things, goods or services, that they can make money on, and the reason they can make money on it is because it's scarce and people need it. So that whole pricing mechanism is vital to a healthy economy, not for people to get rich, but as a signal to know, so that people know what to make and what services to provide. Otherwise, they're just operating in the dark.
I agree. And you mentioned high prices generating more supply or attracting producers to the market. And that's exactly what happens when you look at supply and demand curves, which are generated mathematically. I also have a degree in business in addition to engineering, so I'm definitely a numbers person. And even though markets are a little bit fuzzier than, say, deriving an equation for thermodynamics, let's say, you can look at empirical data and fit models to them and at least observe how something behaves in a quantifiable way instead of just throwing darts at the wall. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's lost on the American public in general, and I it's probably a result of our educational system, but it's also a lack of personal responsibility and people's desire to know exactly what's happening. Their taxation is hidden from them by, with automatic withholding and things like that. But numbers, big economic numbers with lots of zeros, whether it's a deficit or a debt or a budget or the Fed or whatever, it just really gets lost on them. It's really not that, and tell me if you agree with this, I don't think it's really that difficult to understand how the Fed operates and how it extracts wealth from the economy if you know what the difference between wealth, money, currency is, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%. So you mentioned the hidden tax of inflation by devaluing everyone's assets through price inflation. In other words, your dollar buys less because things have higher prices. That's one ill effect of interest rate manipulation. Specifically, it's almost always manipulated to the downside. In other words, interest rates are lower than they would normally be. You also have the malinvestment that results. In other words, businesses and individuals and other entities undertake projects that they wouldn't already or otherwise undertake, and they're not necessarily the best use of the resources they have. But because the interest rates look attractive, these entities will embark upon projects that have a different time horizon than they normally would.
So talk about your opinion about like the 30-year mortgage. How's the government skewed the mortgage market?
Well, I'm not sure with specifics with regard to the 30-year mortgage, but it definitely results in lower interest rates, which kind of trickles down across the board.
Yeah, it's one of the ways that the government skews markets is by by subsidizing things, of course. And once they they're in the business of making banks lend money or guaranteeing loans or making sure that banks don't fail, then they're skewing that market as well. And that's in general, just the existence of, the organizations that bundle the secondary mortgage market is a big problem because it guarantees, it's a way to sort of manage risk, actually mitigate risk for people that lend money to people to buy houses. And that's, but on top of that, in the early 2000s, when the banks or when the federal government basically told banks that they had to lend money to certain people because they wanted people to be happy and they thought that that people that are homeowners are better citizens and they're trying to do all these, make the American dream possible for everybody or whatever. They ended up really screwing everybody basically because they created a bubble that didn't take much to burst and then, basically ruined the housing market for most of the country for years and years. And then what they try to do is talk about how a Keynesian approach to economics is the way to manage that. I mean, that's Keynes in a nutshell. Economies can be managed when we know as people that are, Austrian, followers of Austrian economics and understand that it can't be managed, that because there's too many decisions involved and pricing is important, as we mentioned, that once you go down the path of trying to manage economies like that, you're just creating booms and busts. It's pretty shocking that more people don't realize it, but I know I'm going on and on here. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I misunderstood your question earlier.
No.
You're talking about overt subsidies in certain markets.
Yeah, exactly. So they totally mess up that. As a matter of fact, what we're going to get to, we got about 45 seconds to our break. What we're going to get to after the break is a market that the government has skewed for a long time, and finally a disruptive company popped through, and that's Uber, and its other companies, Lyft, etc. And by virtue of them just going to markets and not caring what the local municipalities were regulating, crashed in and created a demand for something, found the pent-up demand, and took advantage of it to everyone's benefit, drivers, customers, everybody. So we'll cover that after the break. You're listening to The Free People Show at freepeopleshow.com. We'll be back with Chris Kressner and Miles Kristen in about 2 minutes.
Would you like